By the way, there was actually a detail as well that I couldn't confirm myself until I read Richard's report, because he had more like literally I had people who speculated like when Danny didn't want to play, and what you will notice, I did say one person said maybe it was even just at the end of the split, but that wasn't like, I didn't have that nailed down. I wasn't sure myself, like it could have been just before the TL series when we all knew publicly, or maybe it was at the beginning of the playoffs. Like Richard's article confirms that essentially he didn't even want to play the whole playoffs. Now that is actually very relevant for a reason a lot of people are going to have a hard time putting two and two together on, because it's a data point from all the way into last year. The thing that began this whole thing was when it was publicly announced after the Team Liquid series, when they qualified to Worlds and to Chicago, he won't be playing. They said they're going to invoke an emergency sub rule for the LCS. Now, I did a whole video on this, part of why some EG lower down people attacked me and said I was the one making light of his mental health. How's that aged, dickhead? But okay, so what I'd said in this video was I went and looked up the LCS rules, and the way the LCS rules work like this. And by the way, if you just read the rules, there's no other interpretation possible, because they have one set of rules that's about the subs you can use during the regular portion of the split. Now, that is designed, as you can imagine, so you can move people up from your academy team. So in theory, it's open to all the players on your academy team. But once you start the playoffs, the rule goes like this. You have to lock in your 2 subs as well as your 5 starters. And what happens is those are the only subs you can use in the playoffs. So essentially, Riot does say, now this is a side topic we won't get into, essentially Riot does essentially infer you must guess which of your 2 positions could ever need a substitute, which means if one of the other 3 can't play, you're in deep shit. But in this case, EG not only did not list a sub for Danny, so they could have listed the Cowrie guy who was on their academy team, who eventually was the one the emergency sub rule was used for, but it's worse than that. They listed 2 subs for jungle, and one of them, by the way, was a jungle sub by way of he was a coach on the team. He's not even an active player. He's like some Brazilian guy who used to play in like CB LoL or something. So that means they went out of their way not to register an AD carry sub. Now, the reason why that is really significant, guys, is this, because Richard's article shows that they already knew Danny was having these problems, and he had already said he wanted to retire. So that means, one, EG had a rule changed only for them in the moment. By the way, that's the point I think a lot of people don't get. You don't change rules during the active season. You change it for next season. It's too late now. We're doing this rule book. So they changed a rule. By the way, I would just say it again, I think that's an absolute violation. I think you made a rule about your arse to help one set of people, and now it turns out for fucked up fraudulent reasons. But let's rewind a second. Not only did you do that, but then this is what's more sinister, guys. It's not just that they weren't planning on like giving Danny a chance to sub out. It gets darker if you realize what Richard's article implies, because it implies 2 things. One, they actively didn't want him to have a way out of not playing. And why is that? Because as revealed in the article, they still thought they could flip this guy on the market. They thought they could sell him. And tell you what, it's going to look really bad if your player you're trying to sell doesn't play the playoffs and then doesn't even go to Worlds. So you've got to have some reason why, haven't you? So to me, that actually even implies EG was trying to make him play more than even when he's basically begging him each round of the playoffs. Like, please, can I not play? And they're like, we haven't got a sub, Danny.
And by the way, it's implied that the team's management and coaches were also in favor of letting Danny take a break / retire, right,
yes.
Richard?
Yes, and I can unequivocally say that's the case. Ultimately, strategies were made as a collective group in the League of Legends unit, where they were like, listen, we can bring in this player, or
and also just as an aside, it was actually a better strategic move to bring in Cowrie, because his champion pool, the characters in the game he plays, were better suited to that current meta than Danny's were. So like there could have been,
which they knew, by the way, by the time you would have registered the sub, we'd already had the meta switch. Yeah.
So
the prevailing sentiment was basically like, look, and this is even before there was inklings that there were issues coming down the pipeline. Remember, when we're talking about players and coaches, and we're talking about, EG had a huge staff, and they're working every day and working hard to improve. They're coming off, an MSI semi-finals. That was when people were saying, look, he's asking for a break now. We can get Cowrie, we can get, we can do whatever we want. We don't even have to bring him into this split. We can give him off, we can rebuild. We're going to be fine. Like, we can do this. But what we don't want to do is play with somebody who doesn't want to play. And then, so realistically, as I said, it's not even that it starts in the playoffs. The playoffs is when Danny gets to the point where he says, fuck it. If they won't give me time off, I'll retire from the game entirely. There's even a chance if they've given him the split off after MSI that he asked for and asked for publicly, so this isn't me saying it, if he wouldn't have retired at all, might still have a playing career. That's the ultimate, crux of it for me. That they let it get to the point where retirement was the out.
It's also just very important to say that there seem to be disagreements between the people who actually work day to day with Danny on the roster and the upper management who are either neglecting his condition or actively pushing the direct people with oversight over the team to continue him playing on the roster, and talking about how his market value needed to be there if they were to sell, because they were suspicious, by the way, that Danny might have been faking this so that he could be released from his contract and go to a different team.
That was a concern as well.
And also, by the way, the LCS is also complicit in this, because it's something that I said at the time that this substitution came out. Because here's what happened with the LCS. They were literally in a stadium in Chicago. It was their finals weekend. And what they didn't want to have happen was for EG to have a jungle player, a player at a different position, playing the AD carry role, so playing off role, and them getting bopped in a stadium full of people that had paid to have tickets. And so they said, we're making an emergency substitution outside of the rule book that Thorin just talked about. And what I said at the time was like, okay, this might be an actual crisis, but unfortunately you just have to take the L on this one, LCS. The rule is stupid. You should be allowed to use this substitute, but unfortunately the substitute rules are set. EG submitted their substitutes. They put a coach in there for God knows what reason instead of an actual substitute player. And so you just got to you got to take the L, because the thing is, this can be abused. We don't know if EG is abusing it. Turns out they might have been abusing it.
Is the joke. Like, here's the worst thing, Monty.
I was said at the time that I was not taking the mental health seriously. Okay, but it turns out that this was actually a cover for not taking Danny's mental health seriously by EG, guys.
If they themselves said they thought he was faking, by definition, they didn't take his mental health seriously. So miss me with that whole angle if you're the EG org. Don't worry, we'll get later to the idea of how they presented this in the image angle, which is completely, it's not even just like they were faking it. They were the opposite how they presented themselves. But even worse than that, think about what that actually implies based on Riot's decision, Monty. So what we were told in a Reddit post by Jackie Felling, because Riot doesn't do anymore posts about doing emergency sub changes on the LOL esports site. That's never even officially been acknowledged as far as I know, I believe it was just a bloody Reddit post. So she's on the Lena level now of fucking running shit. And then it was just never even put on record. That's already hella sus. To invent a brand new rule change, give it to someone, grant the exception, and then never even mark it down in history and explain yourself. Explain, for example, is there a new rule change? Does this apply forwards? Because think about what it actually infers, Monty. We were told that the reason we couldn't get any details, but that they definitely needed the emergency sub, was that when EG had talked to the LCS and the people, that they'd sort of told them the secret source behind, this is what's really going on. And Riot had sort of realized, this is really serious. Yeah, you need emergency sub. That means Riot's own judgment, if it was legit that he did need to be emergency subs, absolutely indicts and damns evil geniuses for the entire playoffs. That means he needed to be emergency subbed out by that logic before the playoffs even began. He played 3 best of 5 series before he got subbed out. So by Riot's own logic, this, by the way, literally has to be opened as an investigation by Riot on these grounds. Forget the other one. It has to be opened on this one. How did an org abuse a rule like this? And in this scenario, if you're agreeing with them that it was serious, you're agreeing that they actually endangered this person's health, basically.
Correct. Yeah. Basically, I think you're right, Thorin. Like, if they thought this was bad enough to invoke an emergency rule, and, now that it's come to light that all of this other stuff happened in advance, then therefore the org is at least partially responsible for what happened. And, I think the LCS was just had to make a decision very quickly and was bamboozled. I think they were fooled by EG. But this is why you cannot make these snap decisions, and you cannot make a choice about, this is the best for the fans who paid to see this event. Like, that's not competitive integrity. That's a marketing move.
Who gives a fuck?
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.